Hello and welcome to the Reign of Blood podcast, brought to you by the Reign of Blood Festival team. So this is the podcast where you get a behind-the-scenes look at the con and the sharps and bloody kinksters all over the world who will be celebrating with us. So this podcast is intended for mature audiences who have an interest in, well, blood and sharps-based kinks only. So if that's not you, then this podcast definitely is not for you. So these are real stories from real kinksters, and so they may contain discussions surrounding things like health, mental health, kink, blood, self-harm, traumatic experiences, and more. So if you're having a rough day or these topics could be distressing for you, then we would advise you to come back when you're more ready to enjoy the topic with us.
Hello and welcome, listeners. I am Ember Solaris, and today I'm bringing you a special edition of our podcast. So, if you are pretty much anywhere in the world, you've probably heard of the HIV virus. So what exactly is HIV? Well, it's a pathogen. It's a pathogenic virus that is spread via contact with blood in particular. And there's often a lot of stigma and misinformation associated with this virus. It's not the only pathogen that is spread with contact with blood, nor is it actually one of the more easily gotten pathogens that can develop into what we know as AIDS, which is an associated illness and set of illnesses for people who are living with this. However, it's really possible to continue to live a positive, fulfilling life even with HIV, and it's possible to live well. While there is no current cure, there are many treatments that can help improve quality of life and well-being and can prevent the transmission of AIDS. Some of the ways that AIDS cannot actually be transmitted are through casual contact, kissing, sharing water fountains, sharing food, sharing toilet seats, etc., that are often just part of day-to-day existence. Some of the ways it can be exposed include things like unprotected sexual contact, blood transfusions, contact with infected blood with open skin, or via shared use of things like needles or syringes. And these are things that are just generally part of the human experience. But again, there are ways of preventing and lowering risks of transmission and also living well with HIV. For instance, if you receive a needle stick with an HIV positive a needle that has been in contact with HIV positive substances or fluids of some form, then you would need to stick 300 of those individuals with that positive needle, and only one of them would become HIV positive. That's an average of a 1 in 300 risk, which is fairly low when you compare it to things like HBV, which is a 1 in 3 risk with a needle stick. So while we're talking about relatively minimal risks, there is often an inflated sense of fear and stigma surrounding this particular pathogen. So to talk a little bit about this today, I have someone with lived experience with being HIV positive here to discuss kind of what that looks like for them. With me today is someone currently going by the name Amber. So not to mix it up with Ember, but welcome, Amber. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. I have been involved in the BDSM scene for 13 years. I identify as a sadomasochist. I was diagnosed with HIV 4 years ago, and at that time, I didn't think there would be any more future for me in the scene, so I thought I was leaving the scene. But since then, I have wanted to reestablish myself and figure out how to still play and be engaged and be myself, because being a Kinkster is not going away anytime soon. Previous to my diagnosis, I experienced a lot of different kinds of play, and I definitely did a lot of sharps. I did a lot of blood play and needles, both as a top and a bottom.
That's amazing. I appreciate you briefly catching us up to speed there. So, you want to tell us a little bit more about what parts of blood and sharps play you've been passionate about in the past?
I just have bloodlust. I mean, I like blood. And now that I'm diagnosed, I find myself more and more interested in maybe experiencing how I feel about my own blood. It just adds to the taboo of it a little bit. I also, I mean, just in terms of the play, I have really liked the sharp stinginess of it and the endorphin load that you get from needles and scalpels. And playing with it, I don't know, I like a lot of things about blood.
That's awesome.
I also used to be a phlebotomist.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Experience with
Yes.
like a little vampire.
Yes. Yeah, and I worked at the Red Cross, too.
Oh, that's amazing. That's amazing. So, in what I've noticed that you said there that kind of rings for me is that you're interested in using blood play and sharps as a way of exploring and expressing your own body. When I talk to a lot of folks who are trans in particular, or who have a complicated relationship with their body, that's pretty much the same thing that they're using sharps and blood play for often, is to connect with their body, explore taboos, make themselves more comfortable with parts of their body that have been maybe stigmatized. It sounds like there's very much the same interest here for you.
Yeah, I'm not trans, so I don't know that experience. I just know that I'm a masochist. And I also have definitely, I always have to think about my motivation behind playing. And I want it to always to be like a positive experience and from a good, positive place. I identify as in recovery, and when I first came to my understanding of being a masochist and then coming out to my traditional 12-step sponsor, I had to do a lot of reflection and explaining how it was different than self-harm. And that has led me to identify and connect with a lot of other people in Kink who are also in recovery, and we talk about that. Yeah.
That's amazing. So, how has your diagnosis or your kind of positive results here, how's that changed your relationship with Kink so far?
Well, at first I just felt like there was no future for me, and that I was done. And I threw away my needle kit, and I stopped. It was 4 years ago, and it's 2024? It's 2024, right? It was during COVID. And so there weren't a lot of things to attend anyways, because everything was shut down. And I just felt very unhappy without my identity. It felt like my identity was gone. And I have since selectively come out to friends who are also kinksters in the scene. I think a lot of them, in talking to them, like they forget. Because like it's forefront of my mind all the time. But we'll be talking and then I'll start talking about it and they'll be like, oh yeah, I never thought about that. So I've been trying to make connections with other people with HIV. And I have even identified that there is a HIV positive kink group called Mr. Friendly. They seem to be more prevalent in the gay male scene. Like they're present at IML and stuff like that. And I do feel a little bit of marginalization being a woman. Even when I go to my my clinic, there is a lot of literature and there's just a lot of gay male literature.
I'm sure, as it is something that we primarily discuss in that aspect.
Right.
And I'm sure it has to feel a little isolating to have fewer things that are tailored to provide support to you.
Right. Yeah, so that can be a little frustrating.
Sure.
Yep.
So I know you mentioned that you have selectively come out or disclosed your HIV status as positive to certain individuals. Just for some background information, can you discuss some of the reasons that someone may not choose to openly disclose their status to be public, that they're not engaging in play with?
Oh, sure. I mean, there's so much stigma. I mean, there's, it's a protected status for a reason. People have lost their jobs. I don't know. I don't know the history of all the discrimination against people who've been positive. What I know is that in the 80s and 90s, it was a mass tragedy. And, like learning about that history and honoring that history is important, but it's no longer a death sentence. And so there's always a tension between wanting to honor all that pain and tragedy that happened, and also currently in America with access to meds, it's not a death sentence.
Which, of course, acknowledges that in many places in the world, it can be really difficult to access antiretroviral therapy, for sure.
In America, yep. Actually, I'm friends with, connected with a woman in Kenya who's positive. And when I talk with her, I'm always very aware of my privilege, even having access to the meds I have.
Yeah, for sure. And I think there are different levels of stigma, but the HIV community, from my understanding, in addition to stigma and discrimination and access to food and things, also faces significant threats of violence.
Yeah.
I know recently there have been some things going around about doxing. And I think sometimes we don't necessarily realize just how much risk we can place someone in by doxing or disclosing someone else's positive HIV status. So I think that's kind of one of the things that's been in the back of my mind is just how big of a step that can be to disclose when we're talking about and telling people we should screen, we should do these things. Like, we're asking folks to take a big risk there.
Right. I think a lot of people would rather not test and not know than test and know.
Right. Which is unfortunate because it's one of those things where we can use art therapy, antiretroviral technology-based therapies to reduce the viral load to almost nothing, which prevents, of course, all the health concerns and helps keep people safer.
Yeah, I currently am on medication, and I have had a suppressed viral load for probably 3.5 years.
Right, and that's amazing, and it's definitely something to be congratulated on achieving that kind of a outcome for yourself. Right. I think you had mentioned in particular about how you were talking about how it's safer to play with someone with a suppressed viral load. Do you want to discuss that a little bit?
Oh, yeah. I just thought about, the fact that it's safer to play with somebody who's tested, is positive, and has suppressed their viral load to 0 or undetectable than it is to play with someone who's not tested. And there's something called U equals U, which is undetectable equals untransmittable. Mm-hmm. And learning about that campaign has just been very important to me. My status is something that's on my mind 100% of the time these days, which is wearying. And I'm always thinking, should you tell this person? Should you not tell this person? Should you tell this person? Like, do I have to tell everybody? I have some friends that I disclose to. I have a good friend who has herpes. And she has been very vocal and has done some good writings around discrimination in our scene against people who have herpes. And like, she has it on her profile, and just put it out there, just bite the bullet, just put it out there. And I'm like, I don't think I want to put this out there. I don't feel like it's the same. The stigma is still very different.
Yeah, for sure. And the consequences.
Right.
I think it definitely has the potential to create a really scary situation for you for people who do. And I'm sure there are lots of people who feel like they're maybe in the position where they can be that open about things. But I've known many people who have lived experience with HIV who really don't feel that kind of safety.
Right. Yeah. So feeling safe is important.
For sure. I think the average estimates, I believe, in the U.S. are that 1 in 8 people who are HIV positive don't presently know their status because they haven't screened for it. And it's something that I screen for regularly on the basis of just both that I do Blood and Sharks play and also to help destigmatize it. Hey, this is something that I do. I know folks can get actually saliva swabs done for testing as well. Not that most Blood and Sharks kinksters are going to be put off by the risk of a needle. But in that case, it's different in a medical setting. They have swab tests that you can do.
Right.
I screen once every 3 months, usually speaking. Of course, I'm privileged to be able to have access to that kind of a screening, but I think it's really one of our first line defenses in being able to have these conversations. And I think the next part is really just destigmatizing having the conversations. I think people are more likely to talk about it and are more comfortable talking about it when there's no fear of serious repercussions.
Right.
So, in talking about responses, when you have disclosed, do you mind talking a little bit about what people's responses have been like and which ones you found helpful and maybe which ones you have found harmful?
So, in disclosing, a lot of it has been centered around like, how did you get it? And I feel like that question is trying to judge whether or not I deserved it. And I have a mentor. She's a patient advocate for HIV positive people. And she's been positive for a long time, and she serves on boards and stuff. And she's just like, people get it because they're human. I did a retreat with some other women, and that was a big thing. Everyone wanted to know how we got it. And I felt so uncomfortable with that because it's like, I don't like that judgment. It's like, well, if someone got it from a blood transfusion when they were a kid, and if they had it since they were a kid, are they a better person than someone who got it? Because they were injecting drugs or prostituting on the street, like, is that a better situation? Like, you care about that person more now because they got it in a different way? And I, in thinking about my future as an advocate, because that's what I do. I think about my future as an advocate. That's where I'm at with it. I think a lot about wanting to let people know, like, if someone discloses to you, like, try and be sensitive about how they got it, because people get it people get the flu. But people do the same thing with cancer. Like, if someone gets lung cancer, people want to know, well, did they smoke? I think it's a human nature to want to. It helps us feel like we have a sense of control around whether or not we might get a disease, to judge and parse out how someone else got a disease. I just think it's human nature. So,
for sure. It's kind of the same victim blaming mentality. We want to know, oh, well, what were they wearing? Were they smoking? All of these things, because it helps us dupe ourselves into believing if we don't repeat those same behaviors, and if we're not doing that, we're somehow safer. It helps us feel like the world is just, when in the reality, shit happens, and it doesn't matter.
That's right. That's right.
I love the reminder that no one is entitled to that information in particular.
Right.
I wouldn't want people asking whys about or hows about any of my other health information. If it's pertinent for you to know, it's pertinent for you to know. And if someone just chooses to disclose something, cool. However, asking invasive questions like that, again, like you, I feel like it smacks of a lot of that stigma of, well, do you deserve it, or do you deserve my empathy?
Yep.
Which is very dehumanizing.
Yep. Absolutely.
So what are some other responses that you found unhelpful?
Unhelpful? I don't know, so far the people I've disclosed to have been pretty okay about it. I just wonder, I guess I just don't want that to be the only thing people think about when they think about me. Like, that's my HIV positive friend. Like, I don't want that to be my label. I don't want that to be my identity.
Yeah.
It's important to get hugs. It's important to have touch. I feel like some of my friends like don't contact me as much, and I don't know. And I, it's a little bit of high school. It's a little bit of a high school feeling. Like, well, is it because of me, or are they just busy?
Yeah.
And I don't know the answer to that. I've been trying to make new friends. You know, in human nature is that friends come and go.
Right.
But the people I've disclosed to have been close friends of mine. So if I feel like someone's not contacting me as much, I wonder if they're distancing themselves. Because that's a yucky thing to think about.
For sure. I think going out of your way to provide extra support and reassurance around surrounding things and just having communication about it.
Right.
I think sometimes when conversations or situations feel awkward, at least from what I've seen in other situations in particular, we just kind of want to avoid it because it's like, well, I don't know what to say or do.
Right.
And so if things are getting awkward for folks, let's just say there's the friend who maybe it's no less of the stigma, more of the, well, I don't know what to say. What would you want that person to say to you?
I love you. I support you. I can't identify, but feel free to talk to me about it. Because that's part of it too, is maybe like it feels a little bit like people don't really want to talk about it if they don't have it. Which is understandable, I guess, but and that's why I've tried to seek out HIV positive peers. But what I want to find are some HIV positive kinksters.
That would be amazing.
Yeah. And that's how I stumbled upon contacting you for this podcast, because I was on FetLife and I got Brave, and in the search I wrote HIV and Kink, maybe? Or HIV and blood? I don't know. And there was a post you've done. If anyone is HIV positive and a blood player, please contact us for the podcast.
And I was ecstatic. I was ecstatic to hear from you. And the message that you sent, literally, I don't think I started crying. I started crying when you just reached out and, I'm wanting to step back into this because it's something that for many of us is such an integral part of our identity and is so meaningful that having that ripped away or feeling like you can't do it anymore because of a diagnosis, that's heartbreaking to me.
Yeah.
So we're going to be glad to have you back. Happy to have you back. And I've played personally, while I don't identify positive, but not saying it couldn't at some point. Yes. I have played in several different dynamics with other people and done blood play and sharps play in several different dynamics, which is one of the reasons that I'm such a proponent of universal precaution. I treat all bodily fluids as though they have the potential to transmit HIV. That way, when I do come across these situations,
right,
I don't have to do anything different, and I'm not somehow marking someone as different or ostracizing them in some way.
Right.
It's something that's very meaningful and important to me.
Right. Yeah.
So it's totally possible. It is totally possible, and I get that maybe it's not within someone's personal risk profile for various reasons. But I, for one, again, like you mentioned, I would far rather know that someone knows their status and is being responsible about it and communicative than dealing with folks who aren't ready to have that conversation.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that's what I keep telling myself, is that, the fact that, because I haven't disclosed yet to any potential like tops that I might play with in my area.
Mm-hmm.
But I think about it, and I keep on telling myself it's better. But there's that burden. It's just like, it's that burden of having to educate about U equals U. And everyone has, everyone's got to have everyone has a different risk profile, whether or not they want to take that on. So we'll see.
Hey, and that's a big step, though. It's a big step to consider, going back in there and getting to know someone and then disclosing this.
Right. Yeah.
And so how would you recommend that folks have that conversation? How do you recommend that people who are not HIV positive respond?
With curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how to have a conversation. I don't know yet. Don't know yet.
Hypothetically speaking, if you were to say, hey, just before we do this, I wanted to disclose I screen negative for these things, but I do screen positive for HIV. If at that conversation, what would be a helpful response?
Oh, it is so scary.
I know.
I guess when I think about disclosing to tops, I don't have that close friend connection that I have with the other people I've disclosed to. So I just don't know how to respond.
Yeah. But if you had to pick like an ideal dream response, if we were going to ask you to describe your dream car of what you'd like to do.
Well, the dream response would be what you said, which is, oh, well, that's okay. I treat everyone as if I use universal precautions, and you're U equals U, so I feel okay about that, and I know what to do in terms of, even I had talked with a, I did kind of by accident talk with someone who is a presenter who plays with people who is HIV positive, and discovered that they were. It was an interesting situation. They were telling me to watch something by this Mr. Friendly. It was like a Mr. Friendly fundraiser. And they were like, you should watch that. And I'm like, oh, what is that? And they're like, oh, it's the HIV positive Kink, whatever. And I'm like, oh, I have a friend who's HIV positive, who's a Kinkster. And then they disclosed to me that they were HIV positive. And I said, oh, never mind, it's me. When they play with someone, they just let them know, and then they offer them like the pep pill. Mm-hmm. And have that as part of negotiations, but I'm not that bold yet.
Mm-hmm. Which is understandable. It's understandable for you to be hesitant to disclose, and also still very ethical of you to wait to play until you do feel in a position where you can disclose.
Right.
So yes, complicated for sure, but I'm sure that individual also has probably faced significant discrimination in the scene from that.
Yeah, they were told they shouldn't present because they're positive.
Which is dumb shit. Right. I'm just going to call it, that's dumb shit.
Right.
That is absolutely almost archaic, I would say.
Right.
That has no bearing on your capabilities as a presenter at all.
Right.
So that is absolutely terrible. But that's a really great idea, is to talk about the potentials for reducing risk of transmission, like PrEP and PEP as well.
Right.
So
I just miss pain. I dream about pain. I feel physical pain in my dreams.
You poor thing. I feel for you. I do feel for you. That's so sad.
I've had scenes in my dreams, and then I wake up. Yep.
See,
I think that's kind of what convinced me, like, this is still a part of me, and it's not going away.
Yeah, for sure. Let's see. I'm trying to think. So, I'm sure somewhere out here, probably more frequently than we can even guess, are going to be some Blood and Sharps-based kinksters who are currently HIV positive. What would you like to tell them?
Oh, I'd just like to talk to them. I'd just like to talk to them and talk about precautions, talk about negotiations, and talk about, like, the motivation and the taboo.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I want to reclaim, it's almost like other people reclaiming maybe words. I want to reclaim my own experience of my own body, my own blood. And, like, now that I have been diagnosed, like, I get afraid of my period. And then I'm like, well, that's silly. So that's kind of like a mini scene every time. You know, and yeah. So I want to reclaim my own feeling proud of my body, feeling happy about my body. Yeah, I want to reclaim that.
I love it. And there really is, I think, a dearth of support out there to help empower individuals living with HIV in the kink scene. And I would really, especially in Blood and Sharps play, love to see more conversations and discussions surrounding this.
Right. Yep.
So again, I think you mentioned that organization was Mr. Friendly.
I believe it's Mr. Friendly.
Okay. And they primarily support gay cis men living with HIV, correct?
I believe so. Like, they're at the IML convention, and I believe they're more in the gay leather scene.
For sure. Well, I appreciate you taking the time to talk to me today, Amber, and I appreciate you being brave enough to disclose and have these conversations. I know this has been a lot for you.
Thank you so much.
Okay, well, if you would like to discuss HIV more openly, we're not going to disclose Amber's identity for her own protection, of course. Feel free to message me on FetLife at Solaris. And I also have a number of bloodborne pathogen risk and also HIV awareness and sensitivity trainings coming up on the Rain of Blood On Demand series. So be sure to take a look at that. And thank you so much, Kinksters.